Hello, everyone. My name is Morgan Michaels. I'm a researcher with the Myanmar Institute for Peace and Security. Thanks for joining in today. I'm going to be talking about two chapters in our upcoming report. The first is about the conflict between the Arakan Army and the military, or Tamadah, and the second is about the conflict between the Ta'ang National Liberation Army and the Tamadah. So let's get started with the AA. The Arakan Army was formed in Kachin State in 2009. Its leaders recruited among migrant Rakhine men working in the amber and jade mines of Kachin State. Its rise was facilitated by the powerful Kachin Independence Army, which supplied arms and training to the group during its infancy. In general, the Arakan Army seeks greater autonomy for Rakhine State. The Arakan Army and its supporters are motivated by a number of grievances. These date as far back as the loss of the Kingdom of Mraou to Burmese conquest in 1785. Since then, Rakhine State has been ruled by successive Bama-dominated central governments. Rakhine State is also among the poorest and least developed states in Myanmar. So these historical, political, and economic grievances are among the main conflict drivers today. The first clash between the Arakan Army and the military in Rakhine State was recorded as early as 2015, but until 2017, the Arakan Army mostly kept a low profile in the state. This was because it was preparing by mobilizing popular support and stockpiling arms and ammunition in hidden supply dumps across the state. The military also did not significantly respond to the Arakan Army until August 2018, when it began a limited effort to target some AA hideouts, although this was mostly with the use of artillery and not ground assault. The picture dramatically changed in January 2019 when the AA launched its first major offensive. It launched its bid to take over Rakhine State with coordinated attacks on police posts on January 4. The military responded by inserting additional divisions, up to 4 in 2019. This was the first time that the military had inserted additional units into Rakhine State since August 2017, when it began a crackdown in which it claimed was a response to attacks by the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army on security posts. So to give you an idea of the escalation we witnessed in 2019, in 2018, we recorded 56 clashes between the Arakan Army and the military in Rakhine State. And in 2019, this number jumped to 626 clashes. So this is a dramatic escalation in the conflict. The majority of the fighting took place in northern Rakhine State, as well as in one township in southern Chin State called Paletwa Township. And Paletwa Township is bordered by Rakhine State to the south, as well as Bangladesh and India. There was also some limited fighting in central Rakhine, where the Arakan Army attempted to open up a southern front, although with limited success. So far, we've yet to see any fighting spill over into southern Rakhine State, which is home to an important tourist area. If you look at this map, one of the key takeaways is that the pattern of clashes closely aligns to the areas in which ethnic Rakhine villages are situated. And that's because the majority of clashes we recorded in 2019 happened very near, or sometimes even within, these ethnic Rakhine villages that the Arakan Army operates from. The Arakan Army publicly claimed that it would establish a headquarters in Mraou, the ancient capital of Rakhine, by the end of 2020. It called this its Arakan Dream 2020. To do this, it needed to capture territory, so it mounted large-scale attacks by converging hundreds of fighters who attempted to overrun military bases and police headquarters. This was also an attempt to capture valuable supplies, ammunition, and weapons. The height of this effort came in March 2019, when the Arakan Army essentially laid siege to the town of Mraou. The military was able to repel this attack, as it was able to repel virtually every large-scale attack we recorded in 2019. Normally, rounds of large-scale attacks would be followed by a 4 to 6 week pause before another round of large-scale attacks were attempted. But in this interim period, the Arakan Army was able to keep up constant engagement with the military by conducting smaller-scale ambushes and roadside bombings against military convoys across the state. The other thing the Iraqi army attempted to do in 2019 was to dismantle the government's civil administrative structure and assert its own authority. It was largely successful toward this end. By the end of the year, in parts of Rakhine State, the government's administration had effectively ceased to operate or even in some cases exist. The military responded to all of this first by drawing back its strike divisions to guard major towns and bases during the height of the AA's offensive. After repelling these attacks, it launched its own counteroffensive in the summer of 2019, focusing on AA bases, supply depots, and training camps in the jungle. And here is where we witnessed a new development in Myanmar, which was the heavy use of air power to conduct this counteroffensive. Previously, the Tatmadaws air doctrine viewed air power in a supporting role to ground operations, but by the end of the year, it was conducting airstrikes in the absence of ground operations, and it greatly liberalized the use of air power by shifting the authority to conduct airstrikes from Central Command in Naypyidaw to the regional commander on the ground in Rakhine State. Nearly every medium and large scale clash we recorded in 2019 involved the use of air power. The other thing the military did was institute a full land and naval blockade to restrict the AA's supply lines, which stretch very far from the north of the country on the border with China. It also attempted to institute martial law in Rakhine State, but this effort was blocked by the government until early 2020, when an agreement was reached to designate the Iraqi army as a terrorist organization. And under this designation, the military has greatly ramped up its counterinsurgency operations, targeting the Iraqi army's support base. Overall, moving forward, the prospects for security in Rakhine State are quite grim. The Iraqi army maintains robust support among the local population and a strong ability to recruit young men into its ranks. We actually saw an escalation in the conflict in early 2020, although by April and May, the number of clashes had declined. This was possibly due to the military's increasing pressure. But recently, the Iraqi army threatened to target government personnel and infrastructure if the military and government don't vacate the state. So there's a near-term risk for greater escalation. In the long term, the government has so far failed to address the underlying drivers of the conflict, the Rakhine people's grievances and aspirations for greater autonomy, while the military's counterinsurgency operations remain largely removed from the political processes that could bring some sort of political solution to Rakhine State. And so until both the military and the government take some sort of action to address these issues, it's likely that Rakhine people will continue to view armed struggle as their best chance for greater autonomy, and we can expect that fighting will continue well into 2021. So now I'm going to move on to the conflict between the Ta'ang National Liberation Army, or TNLA, and the Tatmadaw. The TNLA was revived in 2009. It was formerly the Palang State Liberation Army, a group that was disarmed in 2005. It recruits primarily among ethnic Palang, or Ta'ang people, who live scattered across both the north and south of Shan State. But its primary area of operation is the north of the state, and it has a stronghold in two townships, which together comprise the Palang Self-Administered Zone. It's a highly mobile force. It's active in almost every Palang village in the north of the state. It's motivated by what it says is a history of bullying of Palang people, not only at the hands of the military, but also at the hands of other armed actors that are active in the north of Shan State. And so it says it's working to protect Palang people from things like forced recruitment, extortion, and other forms of violence. The TNLA does not maintain any ceasefire with the government or military and regularly clashes with the military. These clashes normally are short in duration and happen when the two sides run into each other. The Tatmadaw is typically quite tolerant of the group within the Pelong self-administered zone. Sometimes it targets the TNLA when the TNLA moves close to main roads or other sensitive areas. But this dynamic shifted in 2019 with the advent of major widespread fighting. We'll get to that in a minute, but to give you some idea of the escalation, in 2018 we recorded 87 clashes, and in 2019 this number jumped to 369 clashes. So 2019 actually began on a positive note after the military in December 2018 declared a unilateral ceasefire to make way for bilateral ceasefire negotiations with the TNLA and its partners. In the first 5 months of 2019, we saw a de-escalation in the conflict, but by the summer, these talks began to sour over issues of territory, which led the military to begin to demarcate territory by force. This angered the TNLA, which formed a new alliance called the Brotherhood Alliance, together with the Arakan Army and the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army. And the alliance launched a widespread offensive up and down the economic corridor linking Myanmar with China in August 2019. After 2 weeks of fighting, heavy fighting, the military was able to repel these attacks. The TNLA and its partners were unable to capture or hold any of their main objectives, but they did demonstrate their ability to launch widespread, coordinated attacks, as well as their ability to cause severe disruption to the vital economic corridor through which the majority of Myanmar's trade with China flows. Shortly after the conclusion of the offensive, the TNLA and its alliance partners declared a unilateral ceasefire. For this reason, among others, the military maintained its willingness to continue pursuing bilateral ceasefire negotiations. In the first half of 2020, we witnessed continued deceleration between the military and TNLA, although a recent TNLA ambush does pose some risk for re-escalation. We are hopeful that the overall trend in reduced hostilities will continue for the remainder of the year. The ongoing bilateral ceasefire talks, which were already difficult, have been further hindered by the advent of COVID-19, and so may move quite slowly at this time. So these are some of the key takeaways from these two chapters. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy the report.